Oh, this is so exciting. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I am currently surrounded by my two dogs. So if you hear them barking, please excuse them. It's not my fault. Isn't that so funny, Vicky, that sometimes I feel like that with my nephews. It's like it's their problem. It's not me. So welcome everybody. I'm here with Vicky. My name is Hasan Moon. For those of you who don't know me, hello, nice to meet you. And I'm interviewing Vicky, a very good friend of mine. I would actually call her my mentor and a colleague, and my good friend Vicky, who is actually publishing. The book is coming like closer and closer. I can't wait. And Vicky, thank you for being here, because as we're just chatting about it, I just feel that conversations at home, it's almost like there's one saying that I love that my dad used to tell me, that a bird with nest can fly farther. And I love that saying. And I feel like that about conversations that we have at home, that when you have good conversations at home, when your conversation at home is healthy, you can do it, impacts so much more outside of your home. It impacts your work, impacts your relationship. I mean, what do you do when you have trouble at home? You go to your friends and talk about it. So I truly believe in transforming conversations at home. And I think, Vicky, this is your work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a delight to have a conversation.
And I think also for those of you who are listening into this webinar, whether you're watching it on YouTube or actually on this webinar platform on Zoom as well, and some of you are actually here right now, and I really encourage you to use the question feature there, so you can ask questions, because you must have some burning questions, especially if you're parenting. I think it will be a very good area to please use to ask questions. So let's start with this idea of parent or parenting as identity. So Vicky, you have a way to sort of, the scope that you talk about in your book about how you define parent is very relevant to me. So can I actually ask you to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I think of parent, really, I think of the multitude of types of relationships and families that we have. And so when I refer to parents, I'm really referring to the caring adult
Mm,
that is taking care of the child. And that could be, it could be a grandparent. It could be a relative, an aunt or an uncle. It could be a family friend. Basically, anybody who is responsible for children in their lives. I
mhm.
consider that to be a parent.
Wow. And that actually that comes to me so much, because I consider myself a parent to my nephews, two growing nephews, and
Yeah.
one is turning 14, and the other one is 16. And 14 and 16 are very interesting years. And
Yes.
only reference point that I have is I've been 14 and 16 before. So
Right.
a resource like this is
Yeah.
so immensely useful, right? Wow. So thank you for defining parents like that. And I think in that sense that we are parenting more than, our own kids, that you could be parenting your own kids, but then also there are other children that you may be parenting, or you're playing that role too.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes we find ourselves even being responsible, when our children bring their friends home, right?
Hmm.
When we're in a parenting role, um, we're in a position of responsibility
Right, right.
where we're always modeling essentially,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so really it could be anybody that we're responsible for. It could even be an elderly family member or friend, right? Where we just take on that role of caregiver, of
Hmm.
helpful and caring person. And it is a big position of responsibility.
It really is. Not only a big position of responsibility, but I might add that it's also a source of great frustration at times.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It can be great joy, right? And it can be great frustration. Absolutely.
I
And
sometimes
so how
wonder,
do we
can I?
navigate that, you know?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and really, Vicky, it's kind of like I want to download a program and just upload it onto them. So it's like, here's the app that you need to run as your operating system. Wouldn't that be lovely? Like there's a teenager 2.0 operating system install. My
Well, we can
goodness.
do that now with AI, right? We can just say to AI, be that perfect child for me, and they'll do it.
Oh, and then, sometimes I wonder if that's what's available, then where is that joy of parenting? Because that doesn't include all the happy moments, but also those moments when you see them struggle, grow, question. And just last night, I had this. Actually, this whole week when I have my nephews over, they ask the most difficult questions that I cannot answer. And those are the moments that I doubt myself. I hope that people who are listening to this, I really hope that many parents are doubting daily their decisions, their responses. Because when my nephew, who's 14 or turning 14, he asked me, Auntie, is there such thing as a necessary war? And we're just having like light dinner. And then what a way to like turn that into
Did he say unnecessary war?
like, is there such thing as a necessary war?
Oh,
Is
unnecessary
is
war.
is
Gotcha.
there any war
Gotcha.
that's actually necessary? I'm like,
Necessary. Yeah. Okay.
what kind of question is this? Right? And then that conversation can go to Auntie, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I do think that those are the moments I feel like I am downloading something and I doubt myself. Is that correct? Is that sound? Is that right? Or am I just downloading my assumptions and biases?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the thing, right? Is we we're going to make a lot of assumptions, and we are going to have biases, but in that relationship, I think we keep an open mind, and we recognize that we're not going to be able to answer all the questions. And it's perfectly okay for us to say to our children, you know what, I don't have the answer to that question, but let's look into it.
Mhm.
Maybe we can look into it together, or maybe I can look into it, or you can look into it, right? We don't have to have all the answers to the questions. I don't think that's part of the playbook of being a parent. And yet we think that we do, because we see ourselves as the role models. So we think that we have to answer all the questions and that we have to answer them all correctly.
Mhm.
And but that's quite impossible. I think it's probably much more helpful to say, we're on this learning journey of life together, and whatever we don't know, we're going to explore,
Yeah.
right?
And another challenge is now a lot of adults, a lot of parents, including myself, we're extremely busy. And those things take time.
Yeah.
So, Vicky, I'm joining today as your interviewer, but also as a parent with many, many questions. As you actually are, you
Yeah.
have written, and your book called Relation Spaces is coming out very soon. And it's actually, it says it's a handbook or a playbook for parents and parenting. And how do
Mhm.
we actually use solution focused communication? And solution focused as a name may be misleading because we're not giving the answers or solutions, but how do
Right.
we facilitate that communication that we are actually doing that with our children, that we don't have all the answers, but I'm going to engage you in exploring together.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what it is really, you're absolutely right. It's not about having all the solutions, but it's about having a mindset to solutions, right? It's about entering into that relation space with an open mind, and bringing our best selves to our children, and also looking for the best in them. And if we can do that, then it doesn't matter what challenges we face with them on a daily basis or as they arise, that we will have brought ourselves with that positive intention to
Hmm.
be able to work through the challenges together. right?
Mm-hmm.
Solutions don't remove problems, but they help us to get through them together, right?
Right.
And so that's really um, the idea behind
Mm-hmm.
that positive relation space using solution focus.
And I think, Vicky, as you speak about this, often the pressure that parents feel that we should do more or we should do better.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel that pressure too. And by the way, this book is not about you being a better parent, so to speak, because
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we are already doing our best. And
Exactly.
police,
Exactly.
right? We're
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
tired. And here's oftentimes I feel the gap, and I'm keeping this conversation real, like, for all of you
And
who are
thank you for
joining
doing
in,
that. And
right? And
thank you.
please,
Yes.
ask
Yes.
questions, or what are some of your burning questions or
Yes.
scenarios that you wish that you knew the answers for, right? And that we're not giving answers, but let's share that. For me, it's those moments that I know that I should do better, but I just cannot possibly do more. It's like, I know that I should do better. I know I should have actually said that better, but then I'm so exhausted. I can't do even an ounce more. Are many moments of my life.
Yeah.
And
But yeah. You
right?
know, you know what, Hasan, if the thing is though, is if we can be self-forgiving, right? Knowing that we're not always going to get it right, then what we're actually teaching our children is that they can be self-forgiving and that they don't always have to
Mm-hmm.
get it right, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the case of the human condition, right? We're never going to get it all right. And we have to kind of sit back and say to ourselves, oh, like for example, when my children became adults, I have two grown daughters, right? And when they became adults, like I really had to sit back and think to myself, oh my goodness, I think I have to communicate with them differently now
Mm-hmm.
because they need me differently, you know? And so it's that constant struggle of, okay, how do I communicate with my adult child knowing that they're adults, right? They're
Yes.
independent, competent adults. How do I now
Yes.
gauge that? And inevitably we make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And hopefully we have
Mm-hmm.
children who will say, it's okay, you know, you can be self-forgiving, you've made a mistake, let's move on, right? And we do. But I think the idea of self-forgiveness and also the idea of learning from our mistakes, right? That is really what learning is about, right? It's the whole growth mindset, right? That, we make mistakes, we reflect on them, we learn from them, and then we're able to move on and we're better for it. So we're actually better for it. We experience improved success from making mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is also something that we really need to model to our children because our
Mm-hmm.
children are always confronted with learning. And
Yes.
sometimes they can be very, very hard on themselves when they make mistakes. They view it as a sort of like a crippling failure, when really
Mm-hmm.
it's a positive opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Vicky, sometimes I also think that so many of us, we read parenting books, we prepare for something, and then it's actually similar to coaching. We learn coaching, we actually memorize some lines,
Yeah.
and then we get into this conversation, and then we're like, this is not following the textbook. This situation is not in the textbook. And I would say most of our interactions are like that. And then a certain reaction and action happens in that relation space.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, let's say, well, I'll give you an example. So,
Okay.
Vicky, here's my dilemma that my 16-year-old is learning something. I'm figuring out what he's learning socially, but he actually broke a leg of a couch. So
Okay.
then it's like, I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he was jumping, who knows? But this leg of this furniture is damaged, broken. So now the couch is like doing this.
Oh no.
So then I'm
Yeah.
like, what's happening here? And then I knew that it was him. So I said, what? I mean, what were you doing? There are many different ways of saying this, but of
Right.
course, I was like, what, how did you even do this? Not in a nice way, not in a coaching way of how did you manage to do this? It was like, how did you even like do this? Like, how is
Yeah.
that even possible? And then his response made me so angry because he said, oh, it's just broke. And probably you can get it fixed for like a couple $100.
Right.
Vicky, I had 1,000 thoughts in my head. And the rage was like, have you ever made $200 for you to so lightly say? And it's as if it's nothing. And I was so like angry. And then I almost said it. I was like, I almost said it. But then I said, wait a second, Jeremy, I just don't want to misunderstand you right now because you sound really arrogant and you sound like this is nothing. Is that what you're intending to communicate with me? And he just looked at me and I just knew that he was slightly scared that he might be in trouble. And I think that was his way of trying to get out of the situation.
Yeah.
So he wanted to minimize it.
Minimize it.
Right.
Yeah.
He wanted to minimize it. So he's like acting all cool. It's like, oh yeah, not a big deal. We can get it fixed for a couple $100. So then when I actually asked him, Jeremy, you're not in trouble. Things break. But I need you to really learn to communicate this better so that you're not misunderstood.
Yeah.
So I checked with him. I said, are you sort of like worried that you might be in trouble? Is that why you're making it like that? And then he's like, yeah. So then we were able to actually talk about, how else could you say that? What's the first thing you might need to do next time? And he said, well, apologize. And I said, yeah, that will be very useful because, apologizing actually makes the situation actually much better. Now, this interaction happens on my good days, Vicky.
Right. Right.
On my not so good days, interactions are a little bit harsher than this.
Yeah.
And then the question for me about this whole situation is how are we going to keep more consistency in our parenting approach so that we can choose more of the good days than bad days? But then I don't want this to mean that now you need to be a better parent.
Yeah. So I think, a good place to start, and, and I do think you handled it very, very well. And you ended up having a very productive conversation with him. But you mentioned the word rage. You were
Yes.
really angry, right? And you're entitled to that anger, right? Sometimes our children do things and we get super angry or super frustrated or whatever the case may be. And I think that the best thing for us to do in the moment is to ask ourselves, how are we bringing ourselves to this relation space right now, this very moment? How are we doing it? And if we think that our emotions are getting the better of us, right?
Mm-hmm,
So let's
mm-hmm.
say we're going up to that sort of maximum place of anger, let's say, right? We immediately shift how we're going to respond in the sense that we have to manage our emotions before we do anything else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you're dealing with a teenager, like a 16-year-old, you can easily say, you can actually verbalize your anger. So you can easily say, I am really, really angry right now. And so I need to leave the room for a bit and get control of my emotions, right? And so what you're teaching your child at that point is you're teaching them that emotions are to be respected. It doesn't matter what the emotion is. Emotions are to be respected. They're important. They're meaningful. We have them for a reason, but we need to manage how we're going to use them, right? And so if by leaving the room and gaining control of your actions and telling him that you're going to do that, you can then come back to a productive conversation, right? So that would be the first thing. Now, in this scenario that you told me, you didn't have to do that because you gained control very quickly and you managed the conversation very quickly. So you didn't need to do that. But sometimes as parents, we lose it and we can't have that conversation right away.
You lose
And
it.
Right. We need to step away and figure out how we're going to manage ourselves. So managing ourselves is really, really important. That's one thing that I would say. The other thing that I would say is, you know, our teens are sending us very strong messages. And the message they're basically sending us is, I'm old enough now, I'm independent, I'm smart enough to make decisions. And so to be caught in a situation where they made a serious faux pas or error is not going to sit very well with them. So they're likely going to find whatever way they can to defend themselves, right? So in this case, your nephew chose to just $200, no problem, right? So really what we want to try to do is to avoid putting our children in a place where they have to self-defend. Because as soon as they have to self-defend,
Wow.
there's no adult conversation that's to be had. They're just going to start to self-defend, whatever that is, right? They're going to have a list of things because they're smart. And, you know, they have these beautiful young brains that are completely uncluttered and able to, you know, all of their neurons are firing. They're smarter than we are, right? So they're going to come up with a great defense, right? And so we don't really want to go there. So what we want to do is to encourage that beautiful reflective conversation, which you ended up having with your nephew, right? That beautiful reflective conversation where you come up with ideas and you come up with a bit of a plan, and they are in a position where they have to do a lot of the self-reflecting. If so, you know, here they are, they're saying, I'm an adult. So here's their opportunity to really have an adult conversation. And the way that we achieve that is not by being accusatory, right? But by just merely stating the facts.
Right.
And we may not be able to do that right away when we're really upset. So we gain control of ourselves, and then we come back and we say, okay, here's what happened. The couch is clearly slanted to one side. One of the legs is missing. And, you know, clearly this is going to have to be repaired. So let's talk about this, right? So now you're opening the door to this beautiful reflective conversation. So now your nephew has to figure out how he's going to engage in it. He's not thinking about self-defense, right? So that completely disarms him. And now you can have this productive space. So those are essentially the two recommendations. Manage emotions and then engage in a factual rendition of events that enables critical thinking.
Vicky, as you speak about this, I also wonder, I mean, we're talking about children that we have seen from day one of their time on Earth. I mean, we changed their diapers.
Yes.
And I think I often make this sort of assumption that I know them.
Yeah.
Oh, I know them, right? I've seen you, like I changed their diaper. And sometimes I take on that attitude. And then oftentimes what I then fail to do is I fail to take a learning stance. Because I think I know you, so there's nothing more that I need to learn before I make this conclusion.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, as a growing child, and it's confusing because he looks like me, he talks like me, and you know, it's like he resembles me in a way that I think I know you, but realizing that this is human being that is just becoming, you know, who he is, and I don't know that yet. And maintaining that learning stance. And also as a parent, how do we actually also have the teaching stance? Because those are the roles that we need to play.
Yeah.
And I find it really difficult to stop myself from assuming that I know you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. We develop these ideas of who our children are, right? They're narratives, right? And we perpetuate those narratives. We continue to repeat them to ourselves. But really, our children are a continuous evolution, right? The way that we are as adults, we're continuously evolving, whether we see it or not.
Wow.
Right? And so when we look at our children, we really need to see a continuous evolution. And by doing that, what we're achieving is a situation whereby we are not imposing labels on them and they are not imposing labels on themselves.
Right, right.
Right? Where they are capable of achieving anything and of being anything they want to be. Right? And they are capable because they're consistently evolving and learning.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Right.
but I think that I really see your point that it's difficult as a parent because there's that part of us that wants to kind of define them, right? Right? It makes it a little bit simpler to deal with them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when I hear them say, "Oh, I'm not good with soccer. I'm not really good with," and it's part of their identity forming, but also I don't want them to label themselves.
Right.
And then how much do I think I know? Or how much do I want to learn about how they do their life? I mean, I do that with my clients all the time, but when it comes to my own nephews, how curious am I about their logic of them doing their life? And I think that's an ongoing sort of conversation that needs to happen. And I think, in a way, when I find myself in a situation, not only managing emotions, but also now the kids are growing and there's a bit of power struggle, right? As
Sure.
a parent, there's a power struggle, and I can't forget the first shock of actually the older one saying, "No, I think I'm going to do this," and he sort of disobeyed, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"What?"
Yeah.
Or very commonly, here's what happens. Now, especially the younger one is getting into this power struggle. So it shows up like this text message yesterday. Message it says, "So I'm going to go out for basketball." And I got that text message in the middle of a meeting at work. And then I sent back this text message. Here's a power struggle coming from me. I said, "That's not how you actually ask for permission. Try again." Okay. You're informing me you're going out. No, no.
Yeah.
You need to ask for permission. So that's how my power struggle showed up. And I think it's so interesting that it just shows up. And then he then changed to, "May I go out?" And then I feel like, yeah, there you go. Now you know your place. But that's not how I want this interaction to be.
Yes.
So there's a dilemma of I want him to really gain the sense of self and decision making, but at the same time, I'm getting in the way of him developing it. So
Yeah.
what do we do with these power struggles?
I think that we decide what is worth having a power struggle about,
Right.
right? I think that that's a first step, is to say, is this really worth pushing back on, right? Because teens will often push back on rules and norms and regulations, right? They want
Because
their
we want them
freedoms.
to, yes.
They want their freedoms, right? They want their independence. So they're going to try. I would submit that by texting you and telling you he's going to go out to play basketball, that's his way of asking. So he's actually, because think about it, right? He could have just gone out and played and not told you, and you wouldn't have known the difference, right? Unless you have like a camera like lined up with the basketball net outside of the house and you could see, we all have those, like a lot of people anyway have those door cams now, right?
Wow.
Those doorbell cameras. But he could have done that, right? He could have
Right.
gone out. So but he didn't. He told you. So in a way, he was being respectful by telling you, right? But
Mhm.
I think the question is that something that you want to put your foot down about? Is it that important? And I would say really think about what you prioritize as being most important in
Mhm.
terms of defining norms and rules, and stick with that. But it doesn't have to be, you know, as many things as you might think would be
Mhm.
necessary to set a rule
Mhm.
around, right?
Mhm.
Like, for example, what would be the reason that you would not allow him to go out and play basketball?
Because we have specific sort of so we have action consequence. So we already have
Okay,
that agreement. So
okay,
if you didn't do, let's say, if there's very small things that he needs to do after he comes home from school, light
okay,
snack, and then there's light homework that he needs to do. And after that, you can go out
right.
and you need to be back by this time. So we have that.
Yeah,
And if you don't do that, then you'll be grounded the next day. So we have a very clear agreement.
okay, okay.
And I mean, that's the part that I want to download. It's just a download plug, right?
I
Just
know. I get
remember
what
the rules.
yeah,
So, and I'm sure a lot of parents also go through this, that we have specific sort of not so strict rules, but we have agreements like that, and then they break it.
right.
Now
And
then,
I
yeah, and they're
yeah,
watching
and
if
they're
you're gonna
watching.
follow through or not,
Yeah. You know
right?
what? Listen, limits and consequences are really important. And it's
Hmm.
really important to have consistent limits. So, I completely support what you're saying about that. And I think that your nephew probably really appreciates those limits as well, even if he pushes sometimes to try to,
Every day.
see what he can get away with, right? So I do think those limits are important. But I mean, it could be as simple as, rather than to frame it as you're breaking the rules, you can
Hmm.
frame it as, did you get your homework slash chores done or whatever needed to get done, right? And then he would have to be accountable, and he would have to say yes or no or whatever, at which point you could
Right.
say, make sure then that you finish that up,
Hmm.
and then you can go out, right? So the idea is to provide as many opportunities as possible within the limits,
Hmm.
right? And I think that that's one of the most difficult part of setting limits, is that as parents, sometimes we feel that they have to be very inflexible, right? That it's like, you either respect the limit or you don't respect the limit. But there are ways to talk about it, and there are ways to navigate the limits so that they're healthy,
Hmm.
right?
And Vicky, along with that also, now I love how some kids go through this phase of no, 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 very early on. And then I think around age 8, the whole phase is still continuing, the phase of why, but why, but why? Every single limit. Or I mean, I do that based on conversations that I have with them. But yesterday I said, well, you need to be back by 8 o'clock. And he's like, why? It's not dark outside. Why? And that moment of like, I'm at work and it's over text and it's like, I can't really type. I'm in the middle of a meeting. Hello. And I can, but why? So then, I think I felt challenged, but then I just need to give him context. So I quickly texted him saying, because you haven't eaten.
Mhm.
And eating later than 8 o'clock is not the best because you need to actually go to bed around 10, 11,
Right.
and you will not digest it in that time. So letting him know that the limit is there to protect you, support you, and this is not to harm you or trick you.
Yeah.
And then his
Yeah.
response was, oh, okay. So why, well, I don't know why I spend so much energy thinking he's challenging me, because he just needed to know the context.
He needed to know. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was great that you gave him that insight. right?
But then
And
the
that's,
feeling of you're
yeah,
challenging me, the little thing that, what do you think you are? And that is still there because I refer to how I grew up. My parents are so loving, but then the time, it's like as children, you don't ask why to adults, and that's still in me. That's what I'm figuring out. I didn't know that I had that until these kids are growing and they challenge me in these ways. I'm like,
yeah.
what?
And you know what? And the reality is that when children ask why to adults, that's actually a healthy thing, right?
Yes,
It's actually a healthy thing. They
yes.
want to know why. What they're essentially saying is, I want to enter into that conversation. I want to understand more fully, which is perfectly fine, right? But you know,
I
I
want to
I
enter
do,
into that conversation.
yeah. But I do think that our experiences as children, growing up in our immediate families, have a massive impact on who we are and how we behave with our own children. There's no doubt
Mm,
about it. And it's very, very difficult to step away from that, especially when we love our parents and we believe in a lot of the things that they did for us to support us,
right.
right? And so we think, well, if they did it and it worked, then surely I should be doing the same thing. But that's not the case, right?
Hmm.
We have to be able to take a step back and say, okay, let me think about this. How
Hmm.
do I want to manage that situation? Right?
Hmm.
Given, the lay of the land today, how things are with kids today, how things are in the world today, et cetera, et cetera. Like sometimes I think my parents would have gone crazy if they had to deal with me and social media, if social media existed in those days, or cell phones even, right? Like my parents would not have had a clue how to navigate that.
Netflix, YouTube.
Yeah, so the lives that we live today and the lives that our children live today, imagine the fact, I talked about AI before, but imagine the fact that our children can now write an essay by using Chat GPT.
That is not
You know,
acceptable, Vicky.
that no, it's completely not acceptable. But that is the reality of what's
Hmm.
happening today. And
Hmm.
so we have to realize that our children are growing up in a very different world, even than the one that we grew up in, let alone our parents. So we have to be mindful of how we want to enter into that life with our children. And it's very humbling for us, isn't it? It's very humbling, for example, when we walk into a hospital and the doctor does not look much older than our own child, right? And we realize in moments like that, this is not my world anymore. This is the world of our children, right? So, anyway, yeah,
It's I'm sure many parents who are listening into this will have burning questions, and probably you actually had some interactions just before this call, or maybe last night, and you're like,
yeah.
and you just clicked, the link to listen in. And I think knowing that this is an everyday thing, and it's in a way, last time we chat, actually, Vicky, we talked about this whisper that what
Yes,
do we
yes.
want our children to hear or remember? Because my father passed 3 years ago, and what I remember is small whispers that he actually really whispered, and those are the things that linger. And the things that he said to me in private, in whispers that formed who I am. And I often think about it. What do I want my nephews to hear when they remember me? And do I want them to remember me as like auntie who actually died on the hill of asking for permission? Right.
Right, right.
And the question about, even though this is difficult, when we think about what whisper, because whisper becomes, I often say the habit of our mouth becomes the habit of their ears. So whatever we say it's gonna be the ringing sound in their ear. And what
Yeah,
do we want our children to hear from us? So situation was there just not too long ago that my younger nephew, he felt framed. He went to a department store, a grocery store or something, and a couple of his friends were goofing around. And, store clerk thought they stole something. So they actually told them, you guys are banned for a year. You can't come here. I didn't know any of this because he doesn't tell me. He didn't tell me at the moment, but he just kind of like brought it up, he said, so what do we do when? And he's like, my friend does this. And what do you think? And he's watching for my reaction. And then I just realized that he wants to talk about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when we actually talked about it, I somehow thought maybe I don't know if he was engaged in or not. So I asked him and I said, did you do that too? And he was like, no, I didn't. And that moment that I think he felt accused and now he had to defend. And immediately I said, Nathan, here's the thing. I choose to trust you 100%. I trust you. I want you to know that. And that was my whisper that was more of a, I'm like, oh my goodness, I made him feel like he has to defend. But I think those are some things that I want to also ask you about and ask people to reflect on. What are some whispers that you want your children to hear in their ear? And also that has something to do with what are some things that you really value in your children? It could be their qualities, it could be maybe their strengths, experiences. So what are some of the things that you, in your toughest days as a parent, you still so value about it? And how do your children actually experience that on your toughest days? How do you share that you value them on your toughest moments? Right. So I want to just, pose that to all of you who are listening in. And also, Vicky, yes, those are my burning questions.
Those are great questions, Hasan. I mean, what do we want? What are the whispers we want our children to hear? I mean, the whisper that I know I want my children to hear, even now as adults, excuse me, is that I love them unconditionally. That is a whisper that I want them to hear. That it doesn't matter, what mistakes or what went well or what didn't go well, or, are we having a good day? Are we having a bad day? It doesn't matter. That I'm always, always there for them. And I know that is a whisper that I want them to hear from me. And what we value in our children, we value so many things in our children, right? And the reason why I love that question, Hasan, is because it's a solution-focused question, right? It's not a question about what are the problems we face with our children, or what are the setbacks we have with our children, or, what was the thing that frustrated me today? No, it's about what do we value? What do we hope for with our children? What do we see in our children? Mm-hmm. Not what do we not see in our children? Mm-hmm. That is the, it's a question about positivity. It's a question about looking for the best in our children. And you know what? I'm all for that. And I think that we can do that every day. Every day when we, some people do a gratitude journal. Some people just wake up in the morning and they ask themselves, what am I grateful for? As we ask ourselves, what are we grateful for? We should ask ourselves, what do I value in my child today?
Wow, wouldn't that be so nice, Vicky?
Yeah.
Realistically, every morning I get up in the morning, I wish that I had that luxury of actually space in my brain to actually, what am I grateful for? I wish I could do that, because first thought is, okay, what do I have to do today?
Yeah, yeah, right.
Okay, what do I have?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then because of that, I think what happens is, what matters more actually is not, I mean, we value, like, I don't think I've met any parent who don't value their kids. Mostly we do. But
Right.
what really matters is that the kids know that we value them. We can value all we want, but if we don't show in a way that they get to know, then there's a gap.
Yeah.
So if we ask your children and say, what do you think, your parent actually values about you? And if their answer is, oh, they don't value me, I mean, there's a gap. Or if they say, oh, I don't know, maybe this. And we can really sort of think about, how can we show us thinking about what do we value, but then how do we show that? How do they still know in our toughest moments together that they are valued? Because especially living in this day and age of like social media, as you say, social media is run by likes, evaluation. They're
Yeah.
constantly evaluated. They put something on it and people lose lives over it.
Yeah.
And you post something, and we do that too. Like we post something on social media. If we get like, little likes, then people tend to take it down immediately. And there's this thing called likes, dislikes, likes. And when this generation is growing up, being evaluated, how do we move from that space of you are being evaluated to you are being valued? And that can only happen, I think, intentionally at homes, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
How do we
I,
communicate that, Vicky?
yeah. And I think, you know what, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that it's something that we have to be very mindful of. We have to put it in the forefront of our minds to say, how am I going to actively demonstrate to my child that I value them? And it could be in the specific praise that we give them. You know, praise is lovely because it makes people feel good. But beyond making people feel good, specific praise really tells people what it is that they do, what are their attributes, how they contribute to a situation. And so if they recognize specifically what those things are, they will do them again. So
Mm-hmm.
specific praise is one way of doing that. Affection, you know, a hug or a kiss, just letting them know, a pat on the back, you know, um, just proximity. You know, your child sits down and you just sit down beside them,
Mm-hmm.
right? You engage with them in whatever. It could be something, you know, it doesn't have to be a game or an activity. It doesn't even have to have a goal attached to it. It could just be, oh, look what I found. Let's look at it, right? Um, there are so many ways of showing our children how we value them. Another way we can show our children how we value them is when they come home from school. Just
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you know, they're always being evaluated. So when they come home from school, you know, they just did that test today, or they just got that project back, rather than asking them what mark they got, to further perpetuate evaluation, just ask them, what did you learn today?
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn today? Because, you know, we want them to shift their mindset that they're going to school to be evaluated
Mm-hmm.
to a mindset of, I'm going to school to learn and appreciate learning.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they develop a positive self concept as a learner, they
Right.
will be successful. It's not about the marks. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so, and that speaks to what you were saying about the likes and dislikes on social media, that mindset to constantly being assessed, right? So, I mean, there are so many ways, hey, son, you know, and I think we just have to use our creative energies as
Mm-hmm.
parents to always ask ourselves, how else can I do it? You know?
And kids have this such gift of remembering selectively. And
Yeah.
I think the whisper that now is settling in their hearts right now is that I am proud of them.
Yeah.
And initially they thought I was proud of them because of these reasons. And actually, my older one asked me, are you proud of me after doing something and after
Yeah.
recital something? Now, are you
Yeah.
proud of me? And then at that moment, I didn't say just yes. I said, I am always proud of you, not because of what you do, but because of who you are.
Right. Right.
And I said, just because you're breathing, I'm proud of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the whisper that I keep saying. I really want that to be the ringing sound in their ear. I am proud of you.
Yeah.
And, I need to figure out what else that I can actually whisper. And what's so interesting is one of the things that I remember of my mom doing, actually, in those heated moments when I felt like I was in trouble. And this amazes me to this day. I don't know how she did that. But every time, she never called me any bad names. But here's what she did. If I did something wrong, she'll be like, how could you do this, you little thing that's going to grow up to be a doctor one day? She will always have this random things in there to bless me in times of trouble. And I just found it so encouraging. And, she was very intentional about it. And she was like, this is a big mistake, but I know that. So she will always counter it like that.
Right.
And I asked her, did you know that, why did you do that? And she's like, oh, I don't know. I was hoping that will somehow work. So it's not like,
I guess it did, because you are a doctor today. So I guess.
yeah, right. So I was talking to her about this because I remember those interactions.
Yeah.
And I was like, Mom, like, how did you know that was so powerful? She's like, I had no idea. I was just trying so many things. And I guess that actually stuck with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where I find myself along with many of you who are joining in, like, we're trying things. Right.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think that's the key is when you said, she just said, I don't know, I'm just trying things, right? That's what we have to do. We have to just keep trying things. And if one thing doesn't work, we try something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so we send a message, and the message we send is, hey, we're not perfect, but we're trying things. And sometimes they're going to work and sometimes they're not going to work. And it's okay. Right?
Vicky, maybe, as I'm looking at the time, and we were going to do this poll, but, we don't have to do the poll right now, but I can just pose as a question. And there are a couple of things that I would love to actually pose as a question here, as many people are, listening in, is that how would you rate on a scale of 10 to 1 the potential for the relationship that you have with your child today? If you have multiple children, do multiple, scales, but how would you rate the potential for that relation space on a scale of 10 to 1? 10 is potential maximized, optimized, fully reached. And 1 is there's a lot of potential, but we're just in the beginning stage of figuring it out. And the question is, where would you put yourself on that scale? And I think we will actually continue this conversation in our next segment of this interview.
I love that idea.
Right. And I think that would be really awesome for people to just reflect on where you feel you're at. And I think in a way, one of the things that like parents are working on something all the time. One thing that I'm working on with Nathan is that he feels that he's mistreated because he's a child by the public and, being banned at the grocery store. So one thing that I'm actually working with him is I want him to feel like he's taken seriously. And how it shows up is this. He asked me that question about, is there such a thing as a necessary war? And I was really struggling with, I could have said yes or no. But then instead, I really thought about it. And I actually asked a couple of my friends about it. And then he asked me on Monday. And Friday dinner, we're eating dinner, and I told him, Nathan, I thought about your question. It was a difficult question. And he's like, what did I ask? And I said, well, you asked me on Monday if there's a thing as a necessary war. So I've been thinking about it. And he just looked at me and said, you remember the question? And I said, absolutely, I do. And it's a very, very tricky question. So I really had to take time to think about it. And his face just kind of like, there's a little smile and like standing tall, like a little bit. And I just knew that he feels that he's taken seriously.
Right.
And that was the moment I thought, this is how we do this. One of those rare moments that I got parenting right.
Yeah.
Right.
That was awesome. Yeah.
And I think that's something that I would love to create and grow more in my relation with my nephews. And I think, Vicky, having this conversation each time is so life-giving.
You know, you're on a wonderful journey. You really are. I think that, you know, based on everything you've said about your nephews, it sounds like you have a wonderful relationship with them. And you're going to have the rough days. You are going to have the rough days, but you're on a wonderful journey. I really believe that you are.
And I think that's really the message that I would love for every single parent listening into here as well. You are on a wonderful journey, right? Rough moments, yes. Joys, absolutely. And going back and forth like every day, like multiple times like this, absolutely. But you are on that wonderful journey. It didn't end. No. And there is that potential that we're asking about. And please reflect on that potential scale of 10 to 1. Where are you? And how did you get there? Whatever number that you chose. And we'll chat more about that in our next gathering here. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Vicky. Seriously, every time I feel like you just saved my interaction with my nephews today.
It's such a pleasure, Hisan. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you to all of our listeners, and have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And see you actually in our next segment.